morning was bright and crisp, the sunlight spilling into the tall glass windows of the corporate office, where the CEO was already sitting at the head of the table. The room smelled faintly of coffee, paper, and polished wood. Around the long table, executives shuffled papers, adjusted their ties, and whispered among themselves. Everyone looked prepared, confident, and ready to discuss the big deal that could change the company's future. There was excitement in the air, a kind of nervous energy that came with big decisions and big risks. The CEO, a sharp and seasoned business person, leaned back in the chair, scanning the documents in front of them. Years of experience had taught them to spot problems quickly, but even with all the knowledge, the size of this deal made their stomach tense. This was not a small transaction. The deal promised profits that would double the company's quarterly earnings, but with big gains often came hidden risks. Meanwhile, a young waitress had quietly walked into the room, balancing a tray with several cups of coffee and small plates of pastries. She was new to the corporate environment, her usual work taking place in the cafe just across the street. But today, she had been asked to serve refreshments for the important meeting. She had dressed neatly, but she still felt slightly out of place among the well-dressed executives, all focused on charts, graphs, and spreadsheets. As she moved around the table, offering the coffee, she noticed the tension among the executives. They spoke in technical terms, using words she barely understood. Still, she had a habit of paying close attention, of observing people carefully. She had learned that sometimes the smallest details told the biggest stories. One of the executives leaned over to the CEO and whispered something about the potential return on investment. Another spoke about projected growth, showing charts that looked impressive at first glance. The CEO nodded but did not speak. Something about the numbers felt off, though they couldn't quite put their finger on it. The waitress, noticing the CEO's thoughtful expression, felt a strange impulse. She had learned in her life to trust her instincts, to notice things others overlooked. Without thinking too much about the hierarchy or the room full of powerful people, she softly said, "That deal will collapse." The room went silent. A few heads turned in surprise. Some executives frowned, unsure if they had heard correctly. The CEO froze, staring at the young waitress, trying to understand why someone with no formal business experience would speak so boldly. There was a brief moment of disbelief, almost as if time had stopped. The chatter, the shuffling of papers, the clicking of pens, all of it faded into a quiet pause. The CEO leaned forward, resting their hands on the table. "Excuse me," they said, keeping their voice calm but firm. "Did you just say that this deal will collapse?" The waitress nodded, her voice steady despite the intensity of the room. "Yes, I've been watching the details. Some things don't add up. If you go ahead without checking them carefully, it could fail." The CEO's eyes narrowed slightly, a mixture of curiosity and skepticism crossing their face. The other executives exchanged uneasy glances, some smirking politely, thinking it was a naive comment. Yet, there was something about her tone, calm, confident, and precise, that made the CEO pause. "Can you explain what you mean?" the CEO asked. The room grew even quieter, the air thick with tension. All eyes were now on the young waitress, waiting for an explanation. She took a deep breath and began to point out small details she had noticed. Some numbers seemed slightly off. Certain deadlines in the contract were unrealistic. A partner mentioned in the deal had a questionable reputation, though it was subtle and easy to miss. She explained each point clearly, not with jargon but with plain observations anyone could understand. Some of the executives rolled their eyes slightly, whispering among themselves. "Who is she to question our analysis?" one of them muttered. But the CEO remained silent, their mind racing. Something about her observations seemed to make sense. It was not the typical corporate analysis, but it had a clarity that their team's reports lacked. The CEO picked up a document and began flipping through it carefully, checking her points one by one. As they read, their expression slowly changed from skepticism to concern. Tiny errors and oversights that had gone unnoticed began to stand out. Clauses that seemed harmless on the surface revealed hidden risks when examined closely. The CEO's stomach tightened. They had been confident about this deal, but now a nagging doubt was forming. The room remained tense. The executives, sensing the shift, tried to defend the original plan, speaking quickly about projected profits and market advantages. But the CEO barely heard them. Their focus was entirely on the contract and the observations the waitress had made. Each point she mentioned now appeared to be valid. What had seemed insignificant at first glance could have serious consequences if ignored. The waitress, meanwhile, remained composed. She didn't need recognition or applause. She only wanted the truth to be seen. Years of noticing small details in her life had trained her mind to see patterns others overlooked. She understood risks in a different way, not from formal education or corporate experience, but from careful observation, intuition, and a willingness to speak up when something felt wrong. The CEO finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "Thank you," they said quietly. The words were simple but carried weight. It was rare for someone in her position to be acknowledged by the leader of such a powerful company, especially in front of so many skeptical executives. One of the executives cleared their throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Perhaps we should stick to our original plan. We have done all the calculations," they said, though their voice lacked the conviction it had held earlier. The CEO shook their head, still staring at the documents. "We will review everything carefully. I need to be sure." The tension in the room shifted from disbelief to a quiet, uneasy focus. Everyone realized that something important was at stake. Even the skeptics could not ignore the possibility that the waitress's insight might have saved them from a serious mistake. The atmosphere, once full of confident energy, became somber and attentive. The CEO motioned for the meeting to continue, but with a new approach. Instead of rushing through the presentation and focusing on profits, they wanted to examine each point of the contract, cross-check every detail, and consider the warnings carefully. The executives complied, their previous bravado replaced by careful analysis. The waitress quietly moved back to the side of the room, carrying another tray of coffee, trying not to draw attention to herself. She had done her part. Now it was up to the CEO and the team to act. Her heart beat faster, not from fear but from the weight of what had just happened. Speaking up had been risky, but she had trusted her instincts. As the CEO reviewed the documents, a cold realization settled in. The deal, which had once seemed like a sure path to success, now appeared full of hidden pitfalls. Tiny errors, overlooked deadlines, and misleading numbers could cost the company millions. The CEO felt a chill run through them, a mix of anxiety and gratitude. The warning from someone so unexpected had forced them to see what they could have missed. The importance of listening to voices outside the usual circle became strikingly clear. The executives, seeing the CEO's reaction, began to pay closer attention. The meeting transformed from a confident, almost routine presentation into a deep investigation. Each clause, each number, each partner's reputation was examined. The initial excitement and chatter were replaced by focused analysis, the kind that only came when people realized something critical hung in the balance. Through it all, the waitress remained a quiet observer, noticing the subtle shifts in mood, the way people's attitudes changed when confronted with the truth. She understood that speaking up was only the first step. Helping others see the reality required patience and clarity. By the end of the morning, the CEO had finished reviewing the documents and leaned back in the chair, still deep in thought. The words of the waitress echoed in their mind. "That deal will collapse." Now, it seemed less like an opinion and more like a warning that could not be ignored. Her courage to speak up had altered the course of the company's future. The executives were exhausted but attentive. They knew the day had turned from a simple meeting into a turning point. For the CEO, it was a reminder that wisdom could come from the most unexpected places, that listening carefully, even to voices outside the usual circle, could prevent disaster. And the young waitress, standing quietly at the edge of the room, carried a sense of quiet pride. She had stepped into a world she barely knew and made a difference. Her eyes scanned the room, seeing not just the documents but the people, their confidence, their doubt, their willingness to listen. She realized that sometimes the smallest voice could change the biggest story, and today hers had done just that. The CEO sat quietly, staring at the contract in front of them. The words of the young waitress had shaken the room, and now, alone with the documents, the weight of her warning pressed heavily on their mind. She had noticed things no one else had, details that seemed small at first but could have serious consequences. The CEO ran their fingers along the edge of the paper, rereading the clauses and numbers. Each one seemed innocent until examined carefully, and then the cracks appeared. The waitress, sensing that her words had stirred curiosity, stepped forward slightly. She didn't want to intrude, but she felt compelled to explain herself further. "I noticed the deadlines were tight," she said softly, "and some of the partners don't have a strong record. If one thing goes wrong, the whole plan could fail." Her voice was steady, not loud or commanding, but filled with certainty. The CEO looked at her, appreciating the simplicity and clarity of her explanation. There was no exaggeration, no drama, just the facts as she had observed them. Curiosity grew stronger in the CEO's mind. How could someone with no formal training see what the experts had overlooked? It was unusual, almost impossible. Yet the evidence in the documents confirmed some of her points. The CEO decided to go deeper, double-checking everything with their own eyes. Each number, each clause, each partner's history was scrutinized. What had seemed like a routine deal now appeared complicated and risky. The deeper they looked, the more concerning it became. Meanwhile, the executives around the room were uneasy. Some whispered to each other, questioning the waitress's credibility. "She doesn't understand the business," one said. "How could she possibly know better than us?" Others stayed silent, feeling a strange mix of doubt and curiosity. The CEO's silence made them uneasy. They had expected a simple confirmation of their calculations, not a thorough investigation inspired by a waitress. The CEO called the team together. "We need to go through this line by line," they said, keeping their tone calm but firm. "I want every number checked and every partner investigated. We cannot afford mistakes." The executives looked at each other, realizing that this was no longer a routine meeting. The young waitress had sparked a chain reaction that now required careful attention and diligence. As the team began their detailed review, the waitress moved to the side, quietly observing. She did not speak unless asked, but she continued to notice patterns and small inconsistencies. It was not arrogance or pride that drove her attention. It was a habit of careful observation that had helped her in life. She had learned to see connections others missed and to trust her instincts, even when her voice was small compared to others. Hours passed. The team pored over documents, made phone calls, and examined histories of all involved parties. The CEO watched every step, learning to appreciate the value of her insight. Some of the executives still doubted, but even they could not ignore the growing evidence. The deal, once thought flawless, now revealed cracks that could not be ignored. Every missed detail, every oversight, became a potential threat to the company's success. The waitress, despite being new to such an environment, became a silent guide. When the CEO encountered confusing sections, she would quietly point out areas that seemed inconsistent or risky. She did not demand attention, and she did not argue with the executives. Her presence was steady, like a calm observer in a storm, reminding everyone that careful attention mattered more than assumptions. The CEO began to reflect on past deals and decisions. How often had assumptions gone unchallenged, leading to mistakes? How often had the voices of people outside the usual circle been ignored? The realization was uncomfortable but necessary. Wisdom, it seemed, could come from unexpected places. Sometimes, those who were quiet and observant could see what experience alone could not. By late afternoon, the team had uncovered several critical issues that could have led to disaster. Partners with poor histories, unrealistic timelines, hidden fees, and overlooked clauses all threatened the success of the deal. The CEO felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief that the problems were identified before it was too late, and anxiety over the potential consequences if they had not listened. The young waitress's warning had been the catalyst for this discovery, and it could not be understated. The CEO called a break and walked over to the waitress. "Your observations were correct," they said, voice low and sincere. Without your attention to detail, we might not have noticed these problems until it was too late. The waitress smiled faintly, not expecting praise, but feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had done her part, not for recognition, but because she understood the importance of noticing what others overlooked. Returning to the meeting, the CEO addressed the team. We must proceed carefully. Every decision needs to be backed by thorough understanding and analysis. The details matter more than the assumptions. Today has shown us that even the smallest insight can change the outcome of a major deal. The executives listened, some nodding in agreement, others silently acknowledging that their previous confidence had been premature. The rest of the day was spent revising plans, correcting errors, and communicating with the partners. The initial excitement of the deal had been replaced by careful consideration. What had begun as a confident, almost celebratory meeting transformed into a rigorous investigation. Everyone involved learned an important lesson. Assumptions without verification could lead to disaster. As the office quieted in the evening, the CEO reflected on the day's events. The young waitress had done more than serve coffee. She had prevented a potential catastrophe. Her careful observation and willingness to speak up had altered the course of the company's decision-making process. The CEO realized that humility and openness were as important as experience and knowledge. Listening to those outside the usual circle could reveal hidden truths that would otherwise go unnoticed. The waitress, carrying empty cups back to the kitchen, felt a quiet satisfaction. She had stepped into an unfamiliar world, observed carefully, and spoken when it mattered. She had trusted her instincts, and they had proven correct. It was not about power or recognition. It was about noticing what was important and having the courage to speak up. She knew that her words had made a difference, and that knowledge gave her a sense of quiet pride. By the end of the day, the team had a clearer understanding of the risks and the measures needed to protect the company. The CEO, more thoughtful than ever, recognized that the smallest voices sometimes carried the greatest weight. The young waitress's insight had sparked a transformation in their approach, one that emphasized attention to detail, humility, and the willingness to question assumptions. The experience left a lasting impression, a reminder that wisdom could come from the most unexpected places, and that courage often appeared in quiet, unassuming ways. The next morning, the office was quiet in a different way. The earlier tension had settled into focused energy. The CEO arrived early, reviewing notes and highlighting key areas in the contract that had been questioned the day before. The entire team had begun to understand that the deal, which had once seemed flawless, had hidden dangers. Every section, every partner, every clause was now under careful scrutiny. The air was thick with concentration, and even the usually confident executives felt a new sense of caution. The young waitress arrived, carrying trays of coffee as she usually did. But today she noticed the subtle changes in the room. People moved differently, spoke more cautiously, and paid attention to details they might have ignored before. She had become a silent presence, someone who could not be dismissed. Her words had shifted the dynamics of the office, and everyone could feel it. The CEO called the team together once more. We need to go deeper, they said, voice calm but determined. The issues highlighted yesterday are just the beginning. We have to identify every risk before making any decisions. The executives nodded, realizing that this was not just about money or strategy anymore. It was about avoiding disaster. Each person took responsibility for a section of the deal, diving into documents, emails, and reports with renewed urgency. The waitress observed quietly, noticing patterns and inconsistencies that even seasoned professionals sometimes overlooked. When the CEO came across a confusing clause, she gently pointed out what seemed contradictory. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her observations carried clarity and focus. The CEO was learning to value this outsider's perspective, realizing that her attention to detail was uncovering risks that had gone unnoticed. Hours passed as the team meticulously went through every document. The pressure was high, but everyone worked together, following the CEO's instructions. The initial confidence that had dominated the room was replaced by careful examination and thoughtful consideration. The deal that had once seemed simple now appeared far more complicated, and the implications of mistakes were frightening. The CEO reviewed the potential outcomes carefully. One error could result in financial loss, damaged partnerships, and reputational harm. The stakes were enormous. The executives, who had once been certain of success, now understood that attention to detail and caution were crucial. Even minor oversights could have serious consequences. The CEO reflected on how easily they could have been misled by assumptions and appearances. The waitress's simple warning had forced them to confront reality in a way that experience alone had not achieved. As the day went on, the team began uncovering more issues. Some partners had inconsistent records. Certain deadlines were unrealistic. Financial projections were overly optimistic and lacked supporting evidence. Hidden clauses in the contract could result in unexpected costs or obligations. The CEO's initial skepticism toward the waitress's observations had completely vanished. Her insight had proven not only correct but essential. The executives began to see the value of listening to voices they might normally have ignored. One by one, they recognized that assumptions, confidence, and previous experience were not enough. Wisdom could come from anywhere, and in this case, it came from someone who had been quietly observing and speaking only when necessary. The CEO felt a renewed respect for careful observation and humility. By late afternoon, the team had compiled a detailed report on the risks and potential solutions. Each problem was noted, and potential strategies to mitigate them were discussed. The CEO thanked the team for their diligence but also acknowledged the young waitress. "Your observations yesterday started this process," they said sincerely. "Without them, we might have overlooked these issues." The room was silent, and the executives looked at her with newfound respect. The waitress felt a quiet sense of pride. She had not sought recognition or praise. She had simply spoken what she saw. Her words had changed the course of the company's decisions, and her careful observation had prevented possible disaster. She knew that her role in the office was small, but her impact had been significant. It was a lesson in courage and attention to detail, and she had proven that even those outside the usual hierarchy could influence outcomes. The CEO continued to review the documents late into the evening. Each section was cross-checked, each partner vetted, and each financial projection analyzed. The process was slow and exhausting but necessary. The team understood that moving forward without understanding these risks could be catastrophic. The quiet, steady guidance of the waitress had helped them see things they might have missed, and her presence had changed the way they approached the work. Evening fell and the office emptied slowly. The CEO remained at the desk, thinking about the day's discoveries. The deal, once a source of confidence and excitement, now seemed far more complex. The initial optimism had been replaced with careful analysis and a sense of responsibility. Mistakes could no longer be overlooked, and the value of listening to unexpected voices had been made clear. The waitress gathered her things, preparing to leave. She had contributed more than anyone might have expected from her role. Her observations had sparked a chain of careful investigation that could prevent disaster. As she walked toward the exit, the CEO called her back. "Thank you again," they said. "Your insight has changed how we handle these deals. You've reminded us that everyone, no matter their position, can offer something valuable." She nodded, smiling quietly. Recognition was not her goal, but it felt good to know her observations had made a difference. She understood that speaking up required courage, and that even small contributions could have a lasting impact. The CEO watched her leave, reflecting on the lesson that wisdom and insight could come from the most unexpected places. The night ended with the CEO alone in the office, reviewing the final notes and planning the next steps. The deal would not proceed blindly. Every risk had to be addressed, and every detail examined. The experience had taught them that assumptions, overconfidence, and oversight could be dangerous. Attention to detail, careful observation, and the willingness to listen to unconventional voices could save more than money. They could save reputations, partnerships, and futures. As the office lights dimmed, the CEO felt a sense of cautious optimism. The young waitress had started a process that transformed the team's approach to decision-making. Her insight had revealed the importance of humility, observation, and courage. The CEO realized that leadership was not just about knowledge and experience. It was also about listening, trusting instincts, and valuing perspectives from all levels. And the young waitress, walking home, felt a quiet satisfaction. She had entered an unfamiliar environment, observed closely, and spoken when necessary. Her voice, though small, had altered the course of major decisions. She understood that even in a world driven by power and authority, clarity, courage, and careful attention could make a profound difference. Her actions would be remembered, not just for the insight she provided, but for the lesson she had taught about listening, humility, and the value of every individual's perspective. The next morning, the office was alive with urgency and focus. Everyone knew that yesterday's discoveries had changed the direction of the deal. The CEO arrived early, determined to review every detail personally. Each executive was assigned specific sections to check, and even the junior analysts had to cross-verify the numbers. The young waitress arrived with coffee, noticing the subtle changes in behavior around her. People moved faster, spoke with more caution, and carefully weighed every decision. The CEO called everyone together. "We will not proceed until every risk is identified and addressed," they said firmly. "The issues we discovered yesterday are serious, and we cannot afford to ignore them." The team nodded, the tension in the room replaced by a shared determination. They understood the gravity of the situation and the importance of precise work. The waitress stayed near the side, quietly observing. She did not interrupt unless asked, but her presence had become a calming force in the room. She noticed subtle patterns, inconsistencies in the documents, and overlooked details that the team might have missed. Her quiet focus helped the CEO maintain clarity and reminded the team that careful attention could prevent mistakes. As the day progressed, the CEO reviewed the entire contract with the team. They discovered multiple clauses that were vague, potentially dangerous, or unfair. Partners who had seemed reliable were found to have questionable histories. Financial projections that looked promising on paper lacked solid support. The CEO's initial skepticism had completely disappeared. Every point the waitress had made the day before was now validated through careful examination. The executives began to understand the importance of humility. Confidence without verification had almost led them into disaster. They realized that their assumptions had blinded them to potential risks. The CEO reminded them that no one, regardless of experience, could ignore the possibility of hidden problems. Every voice mattered, even those outside the usual circle of authority. By afternoon, the team began contacting partners and clarifying uncertainties. Some responded with helpful explanations, while others were evasive. The CEO and executives navigated these conversations with caution, realizing that a wrong move could jeopardize the company's position. The young waitress continued to observe quietly, noting subtle inconsistencies in the responses and patterns that might indicate risks. Her insights were shared discreetly with the CEO, who appreciated her attention to detail and perspective. The process was slow, exhausting, and at times frustrating. The executives had to put aside their pride and listen carefully to each observation. The CEO emphasized patience and thoroughness, explaining that any overlooked detail could be catastrophic. The team learned the value of careful investigation, double-checking facts, and relying on evidence rather than assumptions. As the day wore on, a critical issue was discovered. A partner had misrepresented their capabilities, which could have caused significant delays and financial losses. The CEO froze for a moment, realizing the severity of the situation. Had they not listened to the waitress's warning, this issue might have gone unnoticed until it was too late. The realization sent a ripple of concern through the team, reminding them that vigilance and careful review were essential. The CEO addressed the group calmly but firmly. "We must take immediate action. Every detail we uncover now will save us from potential disaster. I want verification from every team member and a complete report by the end of the day." The team worked tirelessly, communicating with external partners, analyzing financial statements, and cross-checking every piece of information. The waitress quietly observed, noting patterns that helped the CEO make more informed decisions. By evening, The CEO gathered the team to summarize the findings. The risks had been identified, and plans were put in place to mitigate them. Certain partners were reconsidered, timelines were adjusted, and financial projections were revised. The deal, once considered straightforward, had transformed into a complex negotiation requiring caution and careful strategy. The CEO took a moment to acknowledge the young waitress. "Your observations sparked this investigation," they said sincerely. "Without your careful attention, we might have overlooked critical risks." The waitress felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had not sought recognition or praise, but her observations had made a real difference. She understood the importance of careful attention and the courage it took to speak up. Her actions reminded everyone that wisdom could come from unexpected places and that even small contributions could have a profound impact. The CEO reflected on the lessons learned that day. Leadership was not just about experience or authority. It was about listening, observing, and valuing perspectives from all levels. The team had been reminded that assumptions could be dangerous and that humility and caution were essential in high-stakes decisions. The young waitress had shown that clarity, courage, and careful attention could prevent disaster and guide others toward better choices. As the office emptied, the CEO remained at the desk, reviewing the final reports and planning the next steps. The deal would proceed, but only with careful oversight and a thorough understanding of every risk. The day had transformed the team's approach to decision-making, teaching them to question assumptions, value careful observation, and listen to voices outside the usual circle of authority. The young waitress left the office with a quiet smile. She had entered a world unfamiliar to her, observed carefully, and spoken when necessary. Her actions had influenced decisions at the highest level, demonstrating the importance of courage and attention to detail. She understood that even in a world dominated by experience and authority, clear thinking, careful observation, and the courage to speak up could change outcomes and save from disaster. The night ended with the CEO contemplating the day's events. They recognized that the young waitress's insight had not only uncovered risks but also taught a lasting lesson about humility, observation, and the value of every voice. The experience would shape future decisions, reminding everyone that vigilance, clarity, and courage were as important as knowledge and authority in achieving success. The morning air was crisp as the CEO arrived at the office, carrying the weight of the previous day's discoveries. The team was already gathered, their faces showing a mixture of determination and exhaustion. Everyone knew that today would be crucial. The deal that had once seemed straightforward now demanded careful execution, attention to every detail, and clear communication with all parties involved. The CEO began the day by thanking the team for their dedication and persistence. Each member had spent long hours reviewing documents, analyzing partners' histories, and cross-checking financial projections. They had uncovered risks that could have led to serious losses, and they had done so because they were willing to listen, investigate, and act. The CEO's acknowledgement reminded them that teamwork and humility were essential in high-stakes decisions. The young waitress entered with her usual tray of coffee, her presence calm but observant. She noticed how the atmosphere had shifted. People moved with more care, spoke with more thought, and listened more attentively. Her observations had sparked a transformation in the office, teaching everyone the value of careful attention, humility, and courage. She quietly placed the coffee on the table and stepped back, watching as the CEO began outlining the final steps for handling the deal. The CEO addressed the team with clarity. "We now have all the information we need," they said. "Every risk has been identified, and every partner has been thoroughly vetted. Today we will finalize the plan, ensuring that we move forward with complete understanding and caution. Mistakes are no longer an option." The team listened intently, understanding that the stakes were higher than ever. They knew that every action, every decision, would have lasting consequences. The executives and analysts began implementing the strategies they had developed over the past few days. Some contacted partners to renegotiate terms, ensuring that commitments were realistic and achievable. Others adjusted timelines and clarified responsibilities to prevent misunderstandings. Financial projections were revised, incorporating all the newly discovered information. The office buzzed with focused activity, each person aware of the importance of precision and communication. The young waitress continued to observe quietly, offering insights when necessary. She pointed out minor inconsistencies in emails and documents, helping the CEO make more informed decisions. Her attention to detail had become an invaluable resource, reminding everyone that even small observations could prevent significant problems. The CEO frequently paused to consult her, appreciating the clarity and simplicity of her perspective. By midday, the team had addressed the most critical risks. The partners were cooperative, deadlines were adjusted, and financial projections were now realistic and well supported. The initial excitement of the deal had transformed into careful execution, ensuring that every step was deliberate and well considered. The CEO felt a sense of relief but remained vigilant, knowing that oversight could still occur if attention waned. The executives, once confident in their assumptions, had learned a valuable lesson. Confidence alone was not enough. Careful observation, thorough analysis, and the willingness to listen to unexpected voices were essential. They understood that mistakes often arose from overconfidence and assumptions, and that humility and diligence were crucial for long-term success. The young waitress had demonstrated these qualities simply by observing carefully and speaking up at the right moment. As the afternoon progressed, the CEO reviewed the final agreements and ensured that all parties were aligned. Each decision was documented, every risk accounted for, and all communications carefully managed. The team worked efficiently, knowing that their efforts were now guided by knowledge, caution, and the lessons they had learned from the previous day's events. The office was quiet, not from tension, but from focused determination. The young waitress, having played a critical role in the unfolding events, prepared to leave. She had not sought recognition, but the CEO called her over. "Your observations have been invaluable," they said sincerely. "You reminded us that wisdom and insight can come from the most unexpected places. Your courage to speak up has changed how we approach every decision in this company." The waitress smiled faintly, feeling a quiet pride. She understood that her role had been small in terms of position but large in impact. She had reminded everyone that careful attention and courage were just as important as experience and authority. The CEO continued, addressing the team. "Let this be a lesson for all of us. Listening, observing, and valuing every perspective can prevent mistakes that experience alone might miss. Today, we are not only closing a deal, we are learning how to make better decisions in the future." The executives nodded, absorbing the message. The day had been exhausting but enlightening, transforming the way they approached work and decision-making. Evening approached, and the office began to quiet down. The final agreements were in place, risks had been mitigated, and the deal was ready to proceed safely. The CEO took a moment to reflect on the lessons of the past week. Leadership was not merely about knowledge or authority. It was about listening carefully, valuing perspectives from all levels, and having the courage to question assumptions. The young waitress had exemplified these qualities, proving that insight could come from unexpected sources and that speaking up could make a profound difference. The young waitress left the office, her heart calm and her mind content. She had entered a world she barely knew and made a real impact. She understood the power of careful observation, courage, and clarity. Her actions had influenced major decisions, prevented potential disaster, and taught valuable lessons about humility, teamwork, and the importance of every voice. She walked home quietly, knowing that sometimes, the smallest voice could change the course of events and save more than money. It could save trust, reputation, and futures. Back in the office, the CEO reviewed the day's progress one final time. Every decision had been checked, every partner confirmed, and every risk accounted for. The team had worked together, guided by insight, attention to detail, and a willingness to listen. The young waitress's observations had set this chain of events in motion, reminding everyone that vigilance, clarity, and courage were as important as experience and authority. Leadership, the CEO realized, was not just about control or power. It was about understanding, humility, and the ability to value every perspective. The deal, once a source of excitement and confidence, was now a model of careful planning and informed decision-making. The CEO felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that the company had avoided potential disaster and learned valuable lessons. The young waitress had reminded everyone that even the quietest voices could carry the most important truths, and that wisdom often came from unexpected places. As the lights dimmed and the office emptied, the CEO reflected on the journey. The events of the past days had transformed not only the outcome of the deal but the mindset of the team. They had learned to value careful observation, listen to unexpected voices, and approach every decision with humility and thoroughness. The young waitress had been the catalyst, her insight sparking a process that would shape future decisions and strengthen the company's approach to challenges. And in the quiet streets outside, the young waitress walked home, knowing that her small but courageous act had made a lasting difference. She had entered a world of power, experience, and authority, yet her clarity, courage, and attention to detail had changed the course of events. She understood that wisdom, courage, and insight were not confined to titles or positions. They could come from anyone, at any time, and sometimes, the smallest voice could prevent disaster and guide others toward better choices. Her journey had ended for now, but the lessons she taught would remain, shaping decisions and inspiring careful observation, humility, and courage for years to come.